Hi, this is Billie Jean King.
This is Marion Bartoli.
This is Bianca Andreescu.
I'm Mats Wilander.
This is Mary Carrillo.
This is Pam Shriver.
This is Yannick Noah, and you're listening to the Tennis Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Tennis Podcast, the second of our 18 daily Roland Garros podcasts from Paris. You find us in our usual spot in the foothills of Philippe Chatrier. The crowds are filtering out of the exits around us because qualifying came to an end about half an hour ago, and we'll bring you some notable results from that a little bit later on in the show. In terms of what our day looked like today, well, officially it was Media Day, where the majority of the requested players come through the variously sized press conference rooms and areas to speak to the world's media. We've spoken to pretty much all of them in one way or another between us today. I've spent most of my day in the main press conference room. You know, don't bother with the riffraff, just the big names for me. David, though,
leave that to me.
David has been loitering with gusto.
Oh yes, I've been in the area which has got new plants and a nice little sort of table and chairs set up in a few little corners of the area, and I basically just sat on the one chair and waited for people to come and arrive.
The area has bouncers this year to keep people out.
Yeah, I've had to do some sweet talking today to be able to stay in, which is a challenge because I don't speak French. But they seem to quite like me, so I'm all right so far.
I tried to go into the area earlier to get some pictures of David loitering, you know, always thinking of content first, me. And I got stopped by the bouncers from entering the area, and I said, I'm only looking for someone. I said, je cherche l'homme très haut. I'm searching for the very tall man. And they said, yep, I know who you mean, he's just left. So that was my day and David's day. Matt Roberts, tell us about your day.
Well, I find Media Day a tough day. I think because it comes after Draw Day, where I get so excited, and I love Draw Day so much. But I had a plan for today, and that plan was to speak to Amanda Anisimova. It sounds like a great plan, doesn't it? A plan that she was... she agreed, she'd consented to it. Yeah. She knew about the plan, she'd agreed to it.
Matt wasn't going to have to do any loitering or anything.
No, I had a pre-arranged time, 2:30. Great. That's my day. That's my purpose today. Fantastic. I then looked at the practice schedule and realised that she was practising between 2 and 3 with Coco Gauff on Philippe Chatrier, which seemed like the sort of thing that she wouldn't want to interrupt for an interview with me.
You underestimate yourself.
So I had to go over to the
you underestimate yourself.
That arrange these interviews for us and say, has anyone noticed this little wrinkle in the plan? Turns out no. So that interview was rearranged for tomorrow.
And you took that news really well, Matt.
Well, I was ready. I was in the zone. And suddenly all my purpose for the day had been shifted to tomorrow.
Quote, she's on a new list.
Look, I definitely could have dealt with it more gracefully, but here I am.
Here we are, folks. So we've spoken to pretty much everybody apart from Amanda Anisimova, but Matt's got a date for tomorrow. Hopefully we'll be able to include that in our Loitering with Law, brackets and Roberts special.
Yeah, for friends.
For friends. That'll be up tomorrow for Friends of the Tennis Podcast. David might bring you some tidbits from it today, but it was such a hit in Australia. It is returning for round 2 from Roland Garros. In terms of sort of the significant names, the major names that came through Media Day today, look, let's be honest here. There were no mic drop moments. There's no obvious big headline, I don't think. You know, quite often there's an injury doubt over somebody significant, and you know they'll come in and go, I'm 100%, you know, and that feels like a big big moment, knowing that one of the main contenders is fully fit. Or there wasn't anything like that today. It was a lot of good vibes.
I think that's the headline. The headline is, what were the vibes like? Certainly in the ones I went in. I mean, you were in much more of the main press conferences. And
David went to Artifice.
David brought the vibes.
I went to Artifice, and honestly, the day could have ended there, because he did not disappoint.
He was incredible. I think he's got like the best aura in men's tennis.
Yeah, you came out of that and said he's got more aura than Carlos Alcaraz.
It's very, very different aura. It's not Labrador puppy aura. It's, it's Great Dane aura. But boy is it aura.
Yeah, he's just seems so quietly, well, not even quietly confident. He's super confident, but he manages to do it in a way that doesn't wind people up. Even the locker room, he was talking about how, I have a great life. I have a great life on the tour.
He started talking about how many friends he has.
Yeah,
he said, if we're talking about my life, it's a good life. And somehow you don't hate him, which is the same quality Carlos Alcaraz has, right? And Roger Federer had it too. Mira Andreeva has it.
Yeah.
It's, it's that I'd like to thank me.
Twinkle in the eye stuff that he's got. And it's a bit cocky, but I tell you, Roger Federer used to have it in those early days. There's a twinkle in the eye, and I mean, my question to Artifice to open the press conference was, "You haven't won a match here," and he sort of grinned at me as if to say, "You didn't have to bring that up." But how do you feel now? Because you've done a lot of winning over the last year, and here you are, you're coming in, there's a lot expected of you. Do you feel different? He just seems to take it all in his stride, doesn't he? It doesn't seem to bother him.
Yeah, and I actually don't think he minded you bringing that up at all, because he's not brittle in the way that a lot of tennis players are. Some players, you have to ask them questions about poor form or poor records in places, and some you feel nervous about doing that, and others you don't. And I'm guessing, David, he didn't feel nervous at all, really.
No.
Asking that of Artifice, because he gets it.
He's got a lovely manner as well. I mean, he came in, he said it was notable that he didn't play the week before, for instance. He lost that match in Rome. He comes here. A lot of players are scrambling around trying to get form. He could have taken a big guarantee, no doubt, to have played somewhere, but he didn't. And they said, well, how are you coping with the fact that you're the man? This was in one of the French questions. I put the earphones in. We get a translation, don't we? Which is such a useful thing for people like me that are not good with languages. And we're getting an instant translation. And they said, how do you not lose too much energy with all this sort of fuss around you? Which is one of my big concerns for him, is he uses a lot of emotional energy on the court, for instance. And he said, honestly, he says, I'm sorry for you guys, but my agent here, he's made sure I don't do too much media the last 10 days because it's tiring. I like speaking to you guys, but I'd rather just basically do it today. And I thought, this is a long-term approach from a tennis player in his camp. These are people that are thinking this guy has actually got kind of greatness potential, and if you try and just take all your opportunities at once, as soon as you make a name for yourself, you can exhaust yourself.
I thought it was also a reminder for me, that Artifice press conference, of the culture among French players and press, the relationship they tend to have with one another is an incredibly positive and healthy one. Almost feels like a bit of a bygone era, a bit of a sort of legacy type relationship, how Richard Evans describes things having been in the past. I'm not suggesting Artifice is necessarily, going to the Wimbledon ball with
Eric Salio.
Eric Salio. But there's a really healthy understanding of an ecosystem there. There isn't suspicion from French players towards French media, and it's not that French media don't ask tough questions, because they do, but there's just culturally the players seem to understand that it's part of their job, and there's a trust there. And I don't know whether that's because there's not quite the tabloid culture in in France that there is certainly in the UK.
I wonder if it's because there's a lot of them that have been around forever. They've always been surrounded by the L'Équipe guys from the L'Équipe newspaper, and there's a lot of journalists that take an interest in them early and they get used to it. Maybe that's part of it.
I'd love to try and get a handle on what it is, because it's very aspirational, seeing a healthy relationship between tennis players and media, because it's all too rare, I think. Last bit of artifice. I said there was no obvious headline from today, Matt, and maybe I've buried the lead here. He's a glasses wearer.
Is that right?
And he's promised to wear glasses to his next press conference.
So he wears contacts on court?
He wears contacts on court. He was wearing contacts in the press conference, but he said only because he'd been practising. He said, my default off court is to wear glasses, like all the cool kids, including David Law now.
Yeah. I only wear them for reading, but I do. It's a faff, isn't it? Getting them out all the time, and just, I keep leaving them places, and But anyway, it's good because I can see now.
I do have one more bit of artifice. Well, I have a question, really. What's his level of concern about Nicolas Jarry? Did that come up?
He didn't seem at all bothered.
He said all the professional things that you're supposed to say about your first-round opponent, taking it for granted, but he did also talk about winning multiple matches.
He did talk about first few rounds.
Yes.
Which is always a giveaway.
There was actually a great moment where he was asked about court assignments and whether he was, kind of what I'd been wondering, really, whether he was expecting to be put on Chatrier or Longlen. He's never played on Chatrier or Longlen before, and there was an amusing exchange with his agent, wasn't it? He kind of didn't want to let on that he was hoping for big court assignments this time, but equally he totally knew that he's in a different bracket now, and I suspect that'll be Longlen rather than Chatrier, and I hope so as well.
I mean, imagine the moments I might get in the first couple of rounds if he gets them at Longlen.
And look, we joke, but Jarry will bring his fair share of supporters as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
he'll need them, yeah.
The Chilean fans come out for Nicolas Jarry. They show up.
And they show up with passion, too.
Yeah,
I love that.
So that genuinely will be a great atmosphere, I think, at that match. I think Longlen's perfect court for that.
Just final bit on artifice. Apparently he didn't want to do the social media feature that a lot of players were doing with some adorable rescue puppies. So he's not perfect.
Is this fear of dogs?
I think so, yeah. I think he might have had a bad experience as a kid. Give them another chance, Arthur. We did have Alcaraz with a puppy content, though.
We had Catherine Whitaker content.
I fraternised with the very same puppy that Carlos Alcaraz fraternised with. It was a real meeting of minds, that puppy and Carlos Alcaraz. I watched it in real time, and I think that content is going to do well on social media. They were having an equally good time.
We have photographic evidence of Catherine watching it in real time as well.
Yeah, there was a moment where Catherine just moved over to a part of the press room where you would never be normally.
You certainly wouldn't be standing like that.
And David came over. I said, is something happening with a dog over there? Because I recognised that look on Catherine's face.
There were 3 incredible rescue dogs, and a lot of players did great content, and it was all for an excellent cause. And well done everybody involved with that idea. I asked if the dogs could stay for the fortnight. Apparently they've got other bookings.
Better than that weird table tennis thing they tried in Interview Room 2 last year that made us not be able to use it.
Yes, this was both more conveniently located and doggy. So well done, Roland Garros social media. Jannik Sinner started another press conference with a clarification about his love life. Quote, there was no girl.
This was so funny. It was a Danish journalist, and I thought, he's going to ask about Holger Rune. No, he said, you were seen in Copenhagen with a girl. What were you doing? And yeah, he clarified there was no girl. And then they asked a follow-up question just generally about his views on Copenhagen.
Yeah.
He said, you have nice parks.
Yeah, and he started with a love life clarification and then moved on to sort of some freelance PR for the Danish Tourist Board. It was...
And then the next
weird.
question was from Russell Fuller of the BBC, a very, very serious question about whether he had attended the meeting that I think took place yesterday between top players and the Grand Slams. And Jannik Sinner just wasn't really prepared to talk about it, was he? So it was a real 180. From the start of that press conference, which was odd and jokey and different, to suddenly hard sort of political tennis question. It was a real oh wow.
He can handle it all though, can't he?
Absolutely.
It was further evidence that the mollycoddling of tennis players in press conferences is just not necessary. Jannik Sinner said, I don't really want to talk about that, and that was fine. It'd been great if he did want to talk about it, but he's a grown up and he can say, I respect the question, not something I want to talk about.
Yeah. 100%. It's one of the things I love about press conferences. As weird as it is, the sort of the directions it can go in such dramatic U-turns, but I quite enjoy that. And I agree with you. I think that they're perfectly able to handle it, and it ends up reflecting so much better on them if they do.
Did you get any sense, Matt, from Jannik Sinner about his level of kind of anxiety about his physicality over best of 5 sets? He said there are no miracles, I need some time, matches are different to practice for sure, best of 5 will be a great test for me.
Yeah, and he talked, didn't he, about some data that he'd gathered and been given off the back of his matches in Rome, and he said that there were no surprises there, but they backed up what he felt on court, which was that some elements of his game, and I think in particular his physical state, were not quite up to the levels that they were before his ban, and he wasn't shocked by that. That was perfectly natural to him. I think that would be the case, but yeah, Rome was this sort of data gathering exercise. I think I kind of believe him when he says that he got more matches in Rome than he was thinking he would get. 2, he said, was the goal. He ended up getting more than that. He got to experience being in a final again, a big occasion. I just think that was all really, really good news for Jannik Sinner coming into this. But that quote, has he got the time? And I think that's the question. I don't know. And that's kind of what we were talking about yesterday, why his draw suddenly looks a little bit trickier when you factor in the fact that maybe he's not quite at his physical best yet, plus there are some difficult names in there. Suddenly it feels like maybe the most intriguing Jannik Sinner slam that we've had in a little while. He's cruised in the hard court slams that we've had in Australia and the US over the last year or so, but this is different, and I definitely think the physical test is the big one for him here, because yes, I know that at times his tennis was a little bit patchy in Rome, but also it was sometimes absolutely stunning. So, I had the same feeling as you, that it's definitely on his mind. Can he cope with the physical demands here with so little tennis in his legs? Even if I do think he has spent a lot of time in the 3 months doing physical work, he does look a bit bigger
and more tanned. Still looks inexplicably tanned. Do you think he could do, actually, with a couple of tests early on, actually, as stunning as it was, that Casper Ruud match didn't really do him any favours at all in terms of his longer term goals in Rome? Could he do with a couple of 4-setters,
though, isn't it? Because you don't want to drain the canister.
Yeah, I think the one big difference is the day off that you get, but there's no shortcuts to this. I don't feel he needed to get started. He got started in Rome. He got maybe a couple more matches than he expected. I think it was inevitable that he felt physical effects from it, and we saw them in that final against Alcaraz. I think there is definitely a chance that he gets affected in matches this fortnight. But then he got affected by physicality and issues in Australia, and he came through them, and he actually came out stronger, if you think back to that Holger Rune match.
Although the stat still remains, he's never won a match over
4 hours.
It's 4 hours, yeah.
Look, this is still his toughest Grand Slam to win anyway. The clay is not his best surface. He's still very, very good at it, but we talked about the draw yesterday. It's not a draw I'd want for him if I was his fan. So I think I don't feel that confident for him.
In terms of Carlos Alcaraz's draw, he's with you, David, in terms of his first-round matchup with Kei Nishikori. You said yesterday at the draw you thought that was tricky. Well, Carlos Alcaraz called Kei Nishikori a legend in his press conference today.
Hey.
He's not taking him lightly.
He's been around for legend-like levels, hasn't he? I mean, I think the first time I ever saw him play was 2008 at Queen's, and he pushed Nadal all the way, and Nadal ended up winning the title that year, then won Wimbledon. I mean, you go back, that's 17 years ago that Kei Nishikori came on the scene, and I think he is one of those players in the locker room. I mean, maybe Carlos is laying it on a bit thick there, but I do think he's one of those players that the locker room appreciates. I think they like this 5-set record. They like the fact that he's come back from goodness knows how many injuries, and he's a nice fella to boot. I think, and I think they rate him when he's on. Like the backhand is so pure. Certain players, I think, they're kind of a little bit starry-eyed about players that can hit shots like that.
And it was a really nice question from, I'm going to use the word legend, Aki, that kind of prompted that answer from Alcaraz, because she mentioned that Nishikori really rates and loves Alcaraz, and apparently for Nishikori, getting the opportunity to play a guy like Alcaraz has been a real motivation for him of wanting to extend his career and come back from all the injuries. He wants to know what it's like to play this new generation. He's been through Federer, Djokovic and Nadal, and now he's getting a chance to play Alcaraz as well. Okay, he's no longer in his prime, but I think that's cool as well. So yeah, I think I'm more excited about this match than I was initially, just knowing that background a bit more.
He was asked by Tumani Carriol about the fact that he was spending so much time yesterday at the draw looking at the draw, which we talked about yesterday, and he says, I wasn't just looking at my own draw, I was looking at the whole draw.
He's a tennis fan.
Yeah.
So I was taking a global view of the draw. He said, you get so many great first round matches at slams, I wanted to know what they were.
I bet he watches every match on telly, doesn't he?
Yeah, it was a really great moment. I asked him about night sessions. I asked him, it's pretty obvious that you'd prefer to play it during the day, but how strong is that preference? And he couldn't, he wasn't able to sort of verbally quantify it for me, but he made it very clear. He said, I don't like the cold. And he said, there's nothing wrong with playing at night, but if it goes late, there's a lot of things you have to do after a tennis match. And he started listing them all, and I was waiting for him to say, and then you have to record a podcast and edit it and upload it. I was like, yeah, there is a lot of things to do after the tennis finishes, Carlos. So he said everybody would rather play during the day here. Well, enter Daniil Medvedev.
He likes to play late, he said.
Yeah, because
not too late.
He said
but
anything's
late.
Better than having to wake up at 6 a.m.
Yeah,
basically.
He wants to ban 10 a.m. starts. He said, if I had to play at 10 a.m, I wouldn't practice because I would have to wake up at 6 and that would make me lose the match.
It was so relatable. Medvedev and Tsitsipas came into room 2 today, which, not long ago both of them would have been dead certs to be room 1, and they came in soon after one another, and there were similarities in the themes of their press conferences.
Yeah, well, questions that I put to Medvedev were off the back of the conversation with Tsitsipas, and he's become quite a reflective, interesting character, really, Tsitsipas, I think, maybe in the last year, because I think he started to sort of have a bit of a midlife crisis about his career, realising that I'm not young anymore. He thinks the game has changed.
Did he quote Bruce Springsteen?
Not intentionally, but I think, he thinks, and Medvedev disagrees with him, but Tsitsipas thinks the game has moved on significantly in the last few years. He thinks that when he reached the final here, it was kind of easier than it is now. And maybe he's looking for excuses a little in that, I don't know. But I found it quite interesting how he says, look, I'm working harder than I ever had right now to make up for the deficiencies, is the gist of it, to try to catch up. He kept referring to how so many of the players now feel like they've got two forehands. He's referring to these two-handed backhands, isn't he, that are just blistering shots. And you think three of them immediately spring to mind for me: Sinner, Alcaraz, Artefis. I mean, Zverev has got this incredible backhand too. You know, they can hurt you in a way that I don't think he can hurt them because of his single-hander. There's not many single-handers that can do it. So it's very interesting.
Just on that point about the game having moved on, whether that's true in fact or not is a kind of separate debate, but how do we feel about the fact that that is how Tsitsipas is perceiving it? Do you think that's a failure to take responsibility, that's making it entirely external factors rather than his own shortcomings? And is that a good thing? You know, it's the same things we always say about Zverev, isn't it? Where's the line between creating your own reality and trying to magic confidence out of nowhere and just delusion?
Yeah, I think for a long time I felt like Tsitsipas wasn't moving on, wasn't progressing. It felt like forever that we were talking about his return of serve, his backhand, his lack of a slice backhand. You know, these were things that, you know, we constantly felt were deficiencies in his game. I think I was reasonably encouraged by the fact that he was trying to use a new racket this year, and we did talk in Dubai about how much better his backhand looked that tournament. And interestingly, it hasn't carried over to the clay. Well, I really thought it would. I really thought that he was coming into form and he was coming into his best time of year. I did think that Tsitsipas would be a little bit more of a force than he has been on the clay this season. But yeah, I do think that two things here can be true. You know, there's a lot of data that suggests that people are hitting the ball harder and with more spin than they were previously. You know, this new generation, Fonseca, Feast, they're pushing the boundaries in terms of those speeds on the ball, whereas people like Medvedev and like Tsitsipas, that generation, are behind in that. But I do think that's part of it, but part of it is also, you know, Tsitsipas has not really improved his own game all that much as well. And yeah, if by solely focusing on, the game's better than it used to be, you're not really telling the full story, I would say. What I think makes a really, really great player is that ability to regenerate their game and that ability to add new things to it and tinker with it. You know, how we talked about that all the time with the big three. You know, that was they're so different. They're so different as players in many ways, but they have such a similarity there in terms of the ability to adapt and move on. And I think you kind of see the difference. I think Tsitsipas is a really, really good player. He is. But to be great, you have to be able to develop and adjust. And I'm just not sure he has all that much.
I just wonder whether these players that came up in the tail end of the Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray domination era, when the big four were carrying on implausibly long, and it felt like, how long can they keep doing this? There was a feeling for those guys of, well, my time will come. If I'm just here and doing what I'm doing, soon that'll be good enough. And the big three, you know, obviously in particular Djokovic, held on a lot longer than was anticipated. And now, by the time they're pretty much gone, well, Fonseca's here, and Feast is here, and Alcaraz is here, and there wasn't a window after all. Yeah,
and we were having the same conversation about Grigor Dimitrov in the era before them, really, weren't we? And one other thing he mentioned was that he's doing a lot more watching back of his matches to try to learn. But I said, how much of them do you watch when you've lost versus how much when you've won? And he said, yeah, sometimes I do just want to watch myself playing well, just to feel better about it. Like to go into a tournament thinking, well, that's how well I can play. You know, look what I did against Djokovic for 2 sets in that final.
Oh, that's quite a thing to reveal, actually.
I mean, he said he does both of them, but he said it is interesting that if you just are looking for your errors to correct, you can set yourself back as well. Sometimes you've got to feel good about yourself.
But equally, there's something a bit tragic about someone as young as Tsitsipas sitting on YouTube watching videos of the good old days.
Although, am I right in saying that Andreescu has said that in the past? That she did.
Well,
also tragic, Matt.
Yeah.
But that's the point that he was making, is positive visualization.
Yeah.
He said, I still go to bed at night with my head on the pillow and I imagine myself winning Roland Garros. And I you know, he's dreaming. He clearly is still in love with the sport, which is nice to hear after Australia, where he seemed lost.
Medvedev's press conference, the questions were almost exclusively about the decline in his game, weren't they? And again, he took them incredibly well. Like, he's not a brittle guy. He understands the role of the media. He is robust and a realist, I think. But, you know, there was one question about retirement. Like, you know, has retirement crossed your mind? And he said, like, no. But then he said, if I dropped outside of the top 50, maybe that'd be another question. And he said, on hard courts, I'm far from the Daniil that I was. But then he said, on clay, I think I'm better than ever. Which, this was really interesting, I thought. Now, it sounded to me like it was a bit of a relief for him to be on clay, even though it's his worst performing and least favoured surface, because he expects less of himself on clay. Everybody else expects less of him, and he feels like he's still making gains. Perhaps not in results, but in his game. He feels that way, whereas it's very clear that he is just as aware that we are that his hard court game is going in the other direction.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up on that and try and get him to explain why he thinks that if you're still able to make improvements and be the best version he's ever been on a clay court, like, why is that not transferable to a hard court? I mean, we've heard him talk about the balls, and we've heard him talk about court speed, and I think that maybe comes into it a little bit more on the hard courts for him. But it's odd that it's not transferable to be able to take what he's doing now on the clay and have it help him on the hard court. Although he did say that he feels like maybe it will. He did say that maybe some of the stuff he's doing on clay will help him on hard courts. He said he feels like he's not far off getting back to the level, but he said that final step is the hardest step to make. It's interesting because his status has changed so much, Medvedev. You know, he was always the press conference I wanted to go to, because not only is he the best talker and analyst, he's also felt extremely relevant to what would happen in the tournament. Today I wasn't really thinking about Medvedev, and then suddenly he was announced and in we all went, and I thought, thank goodness I went to Medvedev's press conference, because it was great. He just wasn't on my radar in a way that he always was for so long.
I mean, luckily David put in a standing
well.
order request for him at every media day for 12 slams in a row. So,
and there was a very enjoyable and unexpected mention of Jan-Lennard Struff.
Yes, who he's using as inspiration.
Yeah, in the big question about has tennis moved on in the past few years, his example was Jan-Lennard Struff. Did not see that coming.
We had Joel Fonseca in room 2, didn't we? That's probably, well, definitely the first big pre-Grand Slam media day experience for him. Seems to be taking it all in his stride, David. David bounced out of that room feeling good about his prediction.
Yeah, so there's your title winner. I mean, he does seem both simultaneously so young and so green in this environment, and yet also quite comfortable to just take it in his stride and see where he goes. I loved the line, I've played a lot of good practice sets and won some sets against some really good players in the last few days. Because, I mean, the last time I saw him, he was getting his clock cleaned by Fabian Marozsan. I'm more encouraged on his behalf. But I did speak to his PR agent, Diana, who used to represent Gustavo Kuerten back in the 90s, at the end of the 90s there. And she really knows how to guide a young player through these sort of situations. And I'm pleased that he's got somebody like her, and she just, I know it's her job to kind of big him up, but I also think she's quite a realist, and she just said he's a lovely lad to work with, and she thinks he'll handle it all just fine, because I worry about that on his behalf, how wonderful it all is. It's such a lot, to take in and to deal with as a young man, the way the adulation, the attention, but I think he's doing all right.
I asked him about what he reckons his best surface is at the moment, because I've always thought it would be clay, but
he gave a great answer to that.
Yeah, he did. His clay court results this season haven't been as eye-catching as his results on a hard court. In the European bit of the clay court season, he obviously did well on the South American clay earlier in the season, but he said, I've always said clay, I've had my best results on hard court, and the surface I want to play the most well on is grass.
That's a good answer.
I just thought, I reckon David's about to predict him to win Wimbledon.
Last into the press conference room, kind of as always, Alexander Zverev was scheduled last in and was 40 minutes late. Also pretty standard. His plane was struck by lightning on the way here from Hamburg. Everybody arrived safe and sound. It's quite common, David.
Is it?
Yeah, planes are built to withstand lightning storms, in fact.
I'd have been quite happy not knowing that. But anyway.
Weirdly, I actually find that quite reassuring.
That it just happens all the time and they're okay about it. Yeah. I'll try and take positives.
Zverev thought it was a very big deal. He compared his form and situation to Carlos Alcaraz's last year. But it felt to me, David, like he was trying to talk himself into some confidence, and the whole thing actually felt pretty dour.
Yeah, I think he's hanging on the best of 5 set format and the every other day off. He thinks that will come into play, I think, because he's not pretending that he's not been in form. I mean, he knows he hasn't been. But he thinks, he said very explicitly, Grand Slams are different. Roland Garros is different to Rome and Madrid and all the other places that he was losing to people, and he thinks that he'll be able to outlast players. And look, the record would suggest that he's going to be right about that. I'm just not convinced he's even in good enough form for that to last if he ends up playing somebody who's really playing well.
Yeah, we'll see, won't we? Any tidbits from the area, David, on the men's side?
Well, I started my day very early. I was in for the very first press announcement of the day with Jakub Menšik, and sat with him for the first time. I'd never met him before. My goodness me, he's a big guy. He's 19 and he is strapping, and he's got a really deep voice, and I thought, goodness me, how are you 19? But I liked him. There's a lovely quiet confidence about him, and it's one of those you'll be able to hear in our Loitering with Law section tomorrow. And who else did I speak to? I spoke to Jensen Brooksby for a little while. Heard some good stories from him. Alejandro
Davidovich Fokina.
Yeah, Alejandro. I never met any of these guys.
Just Alejandro.
First name terms.
Yeah, he was very nice. Liked him, and we got chatting with all of these, and we'll hear more about those tomorrow.
And you hear more about Media Day in part 2, where we'll talk about the WTA players that came through the media centre. Speak to you in a moment. Welcome back to part 2 of the tennis podcast, where we return to the press conference room. Who did we have through the media centre on the women's side today? We had the world number 1, Aryna Sabalenka, who, quote, loves being world number 1. I love it, she said. So much gusto. I just love it so much. I love being the one to beat. I asked her about, how some world number 1s in the past have talked about the old cliche of the it's tough getting there, but it's tougher staying there. The feeling of being chased and being the one to beat. And she says, if people feel like they can chase me, then I'm like, okay, let's go.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a surprise answer. We kind of knew and sensed that about her, but the explicitness with which she said it
reminds me of Serena Williams when she was playing Sabalenka in Australia a few years ago, and she went, "Oh, you want to go power? Okay."
The other headline from her press conference is that she's definitely ill. She didn't mention it, but like, I know ill when I hear ill. But she's also the happiest ill person I've ever seen in my life. Like, she was bouncing, but definitely ill.
What sort of ill are we talking? Because
full of cold.
Well, I wonder whether it's hay fever, because I was sneezing all over the place when I came in here until I had some antihistamine.
Could be your voice has been normal though. She was croaky.
If I sounded like that, I'd have been saying, guys, can't do the podcast today.
Yeah, I'd have been in bed. Yeah.
It was interesting as well. She was asked about, she's not won Roland Garros before, so would she consider making the final here a success? That would be progress. She was pretty categoric. No, she's not in it at this stage of her career for progress. she's here for titles, and I really enjoyed that sort of sentiment as well. And we heard from Charlie Aquashed, didn't we, on Monday about his piece that's going to be coming out about drop shots. And he's been asking players today, and Sabalenka was one of those. And it was just quite an interesting chat, I thought, about the sort of amount of time she spends on that part of her game.
She said currently on the clay she's spending 20% of her practice time working on her touch game.
Wow. Like it.
It's one of the best Sabalenka press conferences I've personally been in, I think. If that music that you might be able to hear in the background, by the way, it's the music they play as the winners are collecting their trophy, isn't it? But what we suspect is happening inside Philippe Chatrier Court is that they are rehearsing a ceremony that is scheduled to honour Rafael Nadal on Sunday.
Yes.
Yes, it's their signature tune, isn't it? I do quite like it. Very dramatic.
We had Madison Keys first up in the main press conference room this morning. She laughed at the mention of the calendar slam. That was the last question to her from Matt Futterman.
I know, I'm laughing at it.
He said, with a wry smile and everything, he said, you're the only person in the draw that can do the calendar slam. And she laughed and went, oh yeah, I'm not thinking about that. And it was a great moment, and I wouldn't have expected anything different from Madison Keys, but I did just think, wow, imagine how differently Jannik Sinner would respond to that question. Nothing's changed in her mindset, and that was actually a good question to her from Charlie Eccleshare about, everything she told us after winning the Australian Open about the work she's done to make her happiness not depend on winning a Grand Slam title. He said, but now you felt how happy it made you. Does that shake the foundations of your new psychology at all? And she was adamant that no, it doesn't, because she's done the work, as they say with therapy. But she did talk about how she understood how players could end up feeling flat after winning a Grand Slam. She said, I can see how if you're desperate for it and you feel like you need it and it might fix something inside you, you can end up feeling flat after you get it, which I think is quite a common sensation that players experience. And she also talked about how tennis just doesn't give you any time to enjoy and celebrate an achievement. She said you're expected to play another tournament 2 weeks later. So she said she's really tried to make a concerted effort to kind of defy the box that tennis is trying to put her in and properly enjoy and appreciate what she's achieved. She did also talk about this being the tail end of her career.
That's perhaps one of the benefits of doing it at the stage of the career she has done it at, that she knows enough to reorganise things and not just go off to the next one.
It must be a real balancing act for her between, having this healthy mindset, which has ultimately ended up leading to her greatest success, and still wanting it. You've got to want it. There are too many players that are too good to be like, yeah, it'd be nice to win, but I'm happy without it. Like, there's a balance there, isn't it? And I feel like she's just treading that line all the time. And sometimes it's going to win her an Australian Open, and sometimes she's going to lose early and be fine about it.
Yeah. And I think there is a somewhat of a phlegmatic approach to her, knowing that her game is about swinging, really. And sometimes they'll go in and sometimes they won't. And you've got to be okay with both.
I have a little feeling that Madison Keys is going to have a really good tournament here.
She's got a good draw.
She does. She's in that bottom half. And look, it's Coco Gauff, I think, in the quarters, who I fairly confidently predicted would reach the final yesterday.
And she's also still not being talked about that much.
Exactly.
I feel like if Madison Keys reached the semi-finals, she'll kind of do it flying under the radar a bit.
Yeah, and look, she was... it was such a remarkable run, wasn't it, to the Australian Open title that she had, where she beat so many good players, and she was kind of the underdog in those matches. And it almost feels like if she played Coco Gauff in the quarterfinals, she would be the underdog. Like, even though she's just won the Australian Open, just feels like she would be. And I just think that's a good place for Madison Keys to be in. And yeah, like I think maybe the conditions of that match would be important as well. If it's under the roof, or if it's lightning fast, I think those would really be dangerous conditions for Madison Keys to really thrive in. It's fun. It's exciting again, going into a slam, like knowing what she's so capable of.
We had Iga Swiatek coming through the press conference room, the defending champion. She seemed kind of fine. There was a moment of levity where she had an exchange about some Lego, which players light up when one of their sponsors comes up organically in a media situation, don't they?
Win-win.
They're usually desperately trying to shoehorn sponsor mentions in, so when it's laid on a plate for them, they're like, thank you very much. So it was like there was a bit of a kind of... She was another one treading the denial line, I think. She was very insistent that, everything's fine. I'm practicing really well. I'm doing the right things. It's just the results don't happen to have been resulting, But she was like, I'm here. I'm at Roland Garros. Everything's fine. Whether I believed her or not, I don't really know. Or maybe I believe her in the moment, but when she steps out onto a tennis court and gets into a pressured situation, everything changes. There was an awkward exchange with one of the journalists in there that was pretty tense, but it was just a moment, and pretty much the rest of the press conference was fairly normal and uneventful.
Yeah, uneventful. She really put an emphasis, didn't she, on wanting to start matches better. And actually, when you think about it, that has been a real issue. Losing first sets pretty dramatically to Keys, to Gauff, to Collins. And I think, it sounds like she feels like she is practicing well, and she is, she said there's nothing wrong with my game in practice, it's good. But as you said, step on the court, bit more pressure and an opponent playing well, and suddenly all of those good feelings in practice are just gone, and it's suddenly a really tense match situation. And yeah, she kind of put it in terms of intensity, which I wasn't sure about. It never feels like to me like she's lacking intensity, but that's kind of how she's describing those starts of matches, lacking intensity. So look, that's going to be interesting. So often with Swiatek, we're used to her we have been used to her starting matches well and barely dropping games, but it has been a big difference this year. As we said, her draw is such that if she was at her best, I wouldn't be that worried about these first few matches for her. But given she's not at her best, I think kind of any match becomes potentially problematic. I mean, look what Alexandra Ayala's done to her this year. You know, a player who you don't feel like should necessarily really have the weapons to be hurting Swiatek, but has been. So, yeah, I'll really be watching those start of matches very closely, I think, for Swiatek, considering that's what she highlighted.
Jasmine Paolini was a joy. Obviously, nothing kind of majorly editorial to report. I actually put those Madison Keys quotes to her about how quickly tennis moves on and the lack of time and space it gives you to appreciate your achievements. I was like, you lifted that Rome trophy 5 days ago, and now you're here having to talk about the next tournament. Don't you just want to be staring at that trophy and smiling? And of course, she put the most positive possible spin on that situation. She was like, yeah, but if you lose, you get to move on really quickly. She was like, that's the other side of that coin, isn't it? Just double-edged sword. You know, in tennis, there's always another chance. So, like, yeah, you'd like a bit more celebration time when you win, but when you lose, it's great. So Jasmine Paolini. The only interesting, sort of notable moment from this press conference was she was asked a question about doping, and sort of a quite general, broad question about doping and whether the Swiatek and Sinner cases have led to paranoia in the locker room. And before the journalist could even finish getting the question out, she said yes. Very, very sternly, she said, yes, there is paranoia about doping. She said, everybody feels vulnerable. She said, I feel vulnerable now. She said, these cases, you sort of knew in the abstract that you had to be extremely careful, but these cases make that feel a lot more real. And she said it's scary, which is about as sort of negative a spin as I've ever heard Paolini put on anything. And it does feel like, to hear someone like her saying that does,
pretty revealing.
Yeah.
As to
reveal what it's like.
The sort of turmoil they go through, really, because, I think a lot of players do think, well, I'm doing everything you're supposed to do, but they're scared. I think that's a good word for it. Why wouldn't you be?
Coco Gauff and Mira Andreeva are a couple of the last two players through the main press conference room. They're both a joy. Mira Andreeva. Gosh, she's great, isn't she?
Sure.
She's great.
She's just great.
Yeah. She just owns that room. Like occasionally there'll be a press conference and you find your mind wandering and you start thinking about what the next press conference is or what else you've got going on.
What stupidly early time they're going to close the cafe.
But with Andreeva, anything fun or interesting could come up in any answer, any of her answers. Yeah, she's fantastic. And I think I thought Coco Gauff named the mix, and I think Andreeva was in it. She named, in terms of players that can win the title, she did a customary Emma Raducanu won the US Open, so anyone can win the tournament. But then the names she listed were Mira, Jasmine, Chinwen, Iga, Aryna, and herself. And it's pretty. That would pretty much align with my mix.
To be clear, did she call it the mix?
No, but I was interpreting it as that.
Do you agree with?
I think that's.
Do you agree with Coco Gauff's mix?
Well,
so Keys isn't in it.
Well, she's playing Keys in the quarters, isn't she?
Yeah, I do think that's about right. I'm not sure about Zheng Qinwen. I think she's the one I would query at the moment because there isn't recent form that makes me feel that that's likely. But the fact that she's won the Olympic gold in this stadium does give me pause for thought. And I'm looking forward to seeing her matches because I want to see if there's a different level.
Would I be more surprised if Zheng Qinwen won this title or Madison Keys? I think right now the answer is Zheng.
Oh, I'd be far more surprised if Keys won. I definitely don't have Keys in the mix.
I'm not necessarily putting Keys in, but if... maybe I'm not putting Zheng in either.
Quite sure I would have said that in Melbourne as well.
Well, exactly.
It's like the Olympics gives you pause for thought on Zheng Qinwen, and the Australian Open gives you massive pause for thought. It does me anyway on Keys.
Even on this surface.
Yeah, I mean, she's reached semi-finals here.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like
she's got a good record here.
It's not like she's never done anything on the clay. And look, I do think, as Medvedev said, that next step is that final step is the hardest one. It's a big jump to go from semi-finals to winning it. But what she did in Australia just wowed me. It felt a lot like everything coming together in that tournament. You know, her tennis was so good. She came through a lot of close matches. How sustainable is that? I'm always a little bit concerned about possible injury risk with Madison Keys. All of those factors that have always been there in her career are still there. They've not all suddenly gone away just because she's won the Australian Open. But would I be that surprised if she did win this? Probably not. Probably not really.
I think you've just articulated something that I felt but couldn't put words to. Do you know what Coco Gauff didn't do today?
Did she not hang out with the dogs?
Oh, no, I think she did.
Okay.
She didn't underestimate Jasmine Paolini. Well done, Coco Gauff.
She started a podcast.
She avoided the bear trap.
She's much smarter than us.
Yes. Yeah, you're welcome for getting to learn from our mistakes, Coco. Anything to report from the area on the women's side, David?
I had
any tidbits?
A little chat with Peyton Stearns, who's had such an interesting few weeks because she finished working with her coach Tom Hill, or rather he finished working with her, and she put out a sort of playful tweet at the time asking for CVs / resumes to be sent in for anybody interested. Well, she ended up with a coach at a very last minute, and look, she just had the result of her life with all those incredible 7-6 in the third wins in Rome. So that was a nice chat about how all that came about and how you recover from those 7-6s in a third when you've then got to come here. That was a really interesting insight, and I enjoyed talking to her. Very straightforward person, and another one you'll be able to hear in Loitering with Law tomorrow.
And speaking of which, we have a time in for Amanda Anisimova.
Oh yeah, tell me. Live reaction.
2:30.
That's what it was today.
When's our practice?
Checks practice schedule.
2 to 3. I was right. I didn't think she was a morning interview person.
That's it for part 2. We'll be back for a bit more in part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the tennis podcast. We're done with Media Day. There will be a few stragglers tomorrow, not just Amanda Anisimova. I don't think Novak Djokovic will be one of those stragglers, though, because he has got business to do in Geneva. He's in the final. He will have a shot at his 100th title tomorrow. It's weird to think that he might achieve something, David, 2 days before the French Open that could... I mean, obviously it wouldn't be as big as winning the French Open, but, Geneva could end up being the thing, the story.
It will certainly be really significant if he does it. I think well done him, given... He's not had the best time of things of late on court. A lot of question marks. The breakup with Andy Murray. He's assembled his new team very quickly. Not household names at all by comparison. Doesn't play Rome. Goes to Geneva right on the eve of a Grand Slam. And here he is in the final. I mean, that takes, I think, quite a lot of sort of mental strength and kind of humility in a way to sort of think that he's won 24 majors and he's done it all, and he goes there. And I mean, maybe the 100 thing is a bigger thing than I'm giving it credit for in his mind of achievements. I suspect it's also just look, I've got to get some matches before this thing starts. But I like the fact that he's not just gone and won a couple and then left.
I actually think the big thing in his mind is 104, not 100.
Which is Jimmy Connors, is that?
No, Jimmy Connors has the record at 109, which I think feels unlikely.
Yeah.
But I think he wants to catch Federer. I think he wants Federer to have nothing.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I think today was the kind of match where if he didn't have the motivation of trying to get 100 with Roland Garros around the corner, like, it wouldn't have been totally surprising to me if after not closing out in 2 sets when he had a match point, if there'd been a bit of a checkout in that third set.
Beat Cameron Norrie 6-4, 6-7, 8-6 in that tie break to Norrie, and then 6-1 in the third.
Yeah, and he let that second set go. You know, there was a really poor drop shot in the tie break when he just got it under control. He lost the match point. Norrie takes it, and I was thinking at that point, oh, okay, like Roland Garros is starting soon. How deep are you prepared to dig here? I mean, maybe he just didn't need to expend that much of himself to win that third set 6-1 against Norrie. Like, he just got his level right. He's obviously always going to be able to beat Norrie. But yeah, I think the 100 is big. Finding form before Roland Garros and Wimbledon is big, and he might be able to achieve both of those things this week. So really, really important week, I think, for Novak Djokovic. But odd, as you said, that it's taking place on the eve of a Grand Slam. It's very different Novak Djokovic experience.
Hubert Hurkacz in the final for Djokovic. Big week for David's fantasy team. Hurkacz in the final there. Caboli in the final in Hamburg. He awaits the winner of the match currently on court between Auger-Aliassime and Rublev. Rublev took the first set 6-1. Yeah, they're finally coming good for you, David.
My Avengers are assembling.
I think obviously reaching a final is good news for Hurkacz, but I think that's quite good news for João Fonseca, who's got him in the first round here.
It's always a fascinating one, isn't it? Is it better to have this form and come roaring into Roland Garros, having won all these matches, but potentially being knackered? Or is it better to just rest up and come in and start fresh? Whereas, Fonseca has been struggling in the matches recently and doesn't have the form. It will be a really interesting one, that.
In Strasbourg, the final is set. Ludmila Samsonova, who just pops up when you least expect it. She beat Danielle Collins today 4-2. She'll play Elena Rybakina in the final, who came through against Beatriz Haddad-Maia 7-6, 1-6, 6-2. Rybakina, Samsonova. I mean, she needs the form, Rybakina. Given the physical struggles she's had over the past few years, I do worry about playing a lot of matches the week before a slam and being able to continue and sustain that through a slam. I'm going to bring up what we always do, but the most stunning performance you've ever seen against Aryna Sabalenka to win the title in Brisbane at the start of last year, and then just a bizarre loss to Anna Blinkova at the Australian Open after that. So I don't know, but maybe she's in enough of a rut at the moment that just, kind of like you were saying with, I can't remember who, another player yesterday, but just winning that title actually is a big enough deal, and whether it impacts Roland Garros or not. In Rabat, what have we got? Talk amongst yourselves, folks. In Rabat, we have a final set between, of course, Jacqueline Christian of my fantasy team fame. Talk about finally coming good for you. It's been a rocky road for me and Jacqueline. It came through a thriller, 6-7, 6-4, 6-4 against Camila Osorio, and she will face Maya Joint in the final. Ayla Tomljanovic retired against Maya Joint.
I take back my ooh.
So there you go. That's what's happening at the other events outside of Roland Garros. Just last thing to bring you news from qualifiers here at Roland Garros. A few notable results and moments. Victoria Mboko, the 18-year-old Canadian player of Congolese descent that Matt Futterman was telling us about a couple of weeks ago. She's a great talent and a great personality. She beat Kai Yuvan 7-5, 6-3 to qualify today. She'll make her Grand Slam main draw debut. And it's a cool story.
It is. Matt Futterman describes her backhand as sounding like a thunder crack. So very, very keen to watch her in person for the first time. And she
Matt wanted to do that today, but it all got torpedoed by being stood up by Amanda Anisimova.
Yep.
Of all the people to stand you up.
What was I going to say? Mboko's drawn Lulu's son in the first round, which...
It's a good draw.
I think it's a good draw.
As somebody that had Lulu's son on their fantasy team for the start of the year and was following her results closely, that is a good draw. Two Czech teenagers
Or dropping her like a hot potato.
who've qualified. Sarah Bejlik, Czech 19-year-old 2022 junior doubles champion here. She beat the top seed in the final round of qualies, Starodubtseva 6-love, 6-4. And Teresa Valentova, last year's girls singles champion. She qualified today, 18 years of age. So that is a name to look out for. Marin Cilic fell in the final round of qualifying to Lloyd Harris. That's a vintage, that match, isn't it? A certain vintage. And Sara Irani's singles career ended in qualifying.
Vintage.
She's going to carry on in the doubles, though. So Matt
Thank
can still
goodness.
have his guilty pleasure. And that's it. That's it for the second daily Roland Garros tennis podcast. We'll be back with more tomorrow. We've got more players to speak to, more stuff to talk about. Hey, we might have Novak Djokovic's 100th title to talk about. And we'll probably be in this very same spot, won't we? Our spot, as we'll call it until the band strikes up on Sunday and it becomes
unusable.
noisy to the point of unbroadcastable.
And suddenly we're somewhere else.
Folks, I have to say hello to Phoebe, my mascot, Maisie, David's mascot, and Roger, Matt's mascot. Hello to our top folks and executive producers, Greg, Chris and Jeff. And it's over to Matt for some shout-outs.
And we start with Mark A. Prince Jr.
Like Freddie Prinze Jr.
All right, Mark. I think I've met Mark. Yeah, I think he's come
In New
and
York?
said hello once upon a time. So anyway, absolutely delighted to have Mark as a friend of the Tennis Podcast.
Do you think he's related to Freddie Prinze Jr.?
I don't know.
No, because the junior isn't part of the surname, is it? It's, yeah. I've thought it through. No.
Seems unlikely.
Yeah. What do we know about Mark?
He has done the career Golden Slam.
Whoa.
He's done the Olympics. Oh, my God, he's done something we haven't.
Atlanta Olympics.
Good work, Mark.
That's epic.
And he's also done the calendar year Slam. Don't know whether that was in the same year.
This guy knows what he's doing.
He does.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, you're cool. Thank you very much.
We've also got Christiane Savoy.
Hi,
from
Christiane.
Like-
New Brunswick, Canada.
Like Jacqueline Christiane.
Same church, different pew.
Most
My gal Jacqueline.
mentions she's had on a pod so far. Maybe not the first time, though.
What do we know about Christiane?
Christiane has been listening to the pod for about 6 years.
Good work.
Still loving tennis, but yet to find a replacement for Nadal.
I think there's a few in your position there.
I actually do hear that quite a lot.
You still
Tough.
see a lot of people walking around with Roger Federer logos on their hats, don't you?
Just ride the waves of grief, Christiane.
Thought you were about to say ride the waves of Carlos Alcaraz.
Well, yeah,
You
but
went in a different direction.
presumably Christiane knows about Carlos Alcaraz and he's not filling the void. So
Yep.
some voids are unfillable.
It's true.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's
sorry.
really depressing.
No, the best thing about sport is that it renews.
Yeah.
Someone will come along, Christiane, I promise.
right.
Until then, ride the waves of grief.
And finally, we have Ali, who says, like Ali Nilly.
Yes,
Oh,
former
very good.
umpire who I knew well at Queen's. He often came and was the supervisor or the umpire at Queen's. Very nice fella.
What do we know about Ali?
Ali is from Iran and says Mansour Bahrami was a good friend of my uncle.
Whoa, that's cool. We know Mansour, don't we?
We do know Mansour.
We've
yeah.
seen all the tricks many times, and that still make me laugh,
Yeah.
even after all these years.
Yeah, I think I've got a signed copy of his autobiography somewhere, The Man Behind the Moustache.
Yeah, it's worth it.
Well, there we go. Ali. Amazing. Ali, Christian and Mark.
Yep. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you to all of our friends of the Tennis Podcast. You've got a bonus episode coming your way tomorrow featuring loitering with law and bonus upon bonus. Matt forgives Amanda Anisimova.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. TBC. Also a reminder, as we told you yesterday, every episode of the Tennis Podcast is now available on YouTube, as well, of course, as every other podcast provider. And, of course, the Tennis Podcast is proudly part of the Athletic Podcast Network. 2 down, 16 to go. Thanks for listening. We'll speak to you tomorrow.